Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. I am not gay. So why are people being targeted? Well, it has to do with the left, right, middle, and controlled social group paradigm and the multicultural modern day plantation. And when I say multicultural, I don't just mean the left. This also includes the right and the middle and the controlled social groups. And it also includes, white nationalists and what have you. I'm not a racial supremacist. I'm just simply telling you the facts. So when we hear phrases like master mason, okay, the master slave relationship, we see, sexual sadism, and they call it bondage, right? Bondage, sadomasochistic behavior, BDSM, or what have you, right? But the word bondage is key here. What they're doing is very much for sexual control. Now I'm going to read through this because they're feeling me because they're not men. They're like little boys that never grew up that don't want me to have my freedom of speech. So I'm just going to read through this and I'll put in the descriptions in the comments point by point, a more in-depth explanation. Point number one, they try very hard to keep people from organizing their thoughts, to get your thoughts together, right? To get her, so to speak, to get your thoughts in a way that allows you to get the woman, right? To organize your thoughts and to masterfully get the woman. They want to try to make you gay. They want you to settle, what have you. Point number two, they limit freedom of speech with excessive censorship and targeting individuals as part of it. Okay. Again, the slaves on the plantation were not taken seriously. And it's not just, black slaves, right? And there was also Native American slaves. There was white indentured servants. 50% of Greeks in ancient Greece were slaves. 20 to 30% of the Romans in ancient Rome were slaves. Okay. Point number three. All opposition groups with any significant numbers are controlled. Slaves were obviously controlled. Point number four. They have destroyed freedom of expression for conservatism and the collective. Okay, again, the slaves were controlled and they were seen as property. Okay. Point number five. The poor left is more sabotaged than the right to try to make the right seem more appealing. Okay. As slaves tend to be part of caste systems, feudal systems, right? They try to make it seem like the more you're like the core oppressor, then magically the more you're ideal. That was a key part of slavery. Okay, we'll get to that. Okay. And of course, there's more minorities on the left. And so that's part of why they do it that way, right? Because the core oppressors of these certain rich, white, Jewish, and LGBT lines, and they try to elevate their races and groups above other people to feed into the falsehood that they're magically superior. Okay, where are we here? Point number six. They threaten people with financial sabotage if they don't listen to mentors, which is despicable, right? Why would you want to listen? They even call a mentor, right? Mentor is men rot, scrambled. Okay, and mention, right? The word mention is a play on words for men shun. Mention that the true men in society are shunned. Mention it. Mentor, right? Men rot. That's part of why. Okay. And of course, slaves were told what to do. And even back in the day with the Freemasons during slavery and what have you, during that form of slavery, they had people who they were taken as apprentices, right? Apprentice, fellowship, master mason, the degrees, what have you. And there's 33 levels in the military, as the saying goes, and 33 levels in masonry. Okay. Point number seven. They want people to, in Scottish, right, masonry and so on. Point number seven. They want people to date with their scale and to have sex the ways that they think that they should have them. And this means that that at times they have to change their sexual orientation. So again, they want people to have sex in certain ways, right? If you think about it, you'll see that clearly. They talk about corporate sexual control, sexual energy, sexual power. They mix in Eastern philosophies a certain way. They talk about Tai Chi and sexual energy and yoga and sexual energy. If you look at it, it's clear cut there. At the same time, they have some people acting like complete clowns because they want you to think that certain genes and certain types of people are superior. So people are kind of self-sabotaging on purpose to fit in to the show, right? The word hoe and the word show rhyme for a reason. Okay. All right. We see that again, that 50% of Greeks were slaves. Greeks said people lived in Greece, and 20 to 30% of Romans were slaves. So this is part of their historical kind of slave system that predates, the plantation. If you lived in 1800 and you were a black slave on a plantation, you know, and someone said to you, "Hey, you're not a slave. They did that just because they did that in Greece doesn't mean they're doing that now." You would think they're crazy. And so it is with this modern day slavery, right? Anyone who thinks that they're not a slave, okay, when they're not scrambling to resist their oppressor, is crazy. Point number 8. There is a scientific racist scale at play. Okay, you see the Greco-Roman societies had cult deities. They didn't just have slaves, they had deities whose statues were expressions of certain governing class family lines. And so did the feudal system in Northern Europe, for example, in France, in England, what have you. Okay, the scientific racism, right? It's more than just racism. They're trying to scientifically identify their traits and pretend that they're superior. For example, if you look at an old martial art movie, right, the Asian guy has a sharper mind, okay, is more brilliant than the one who's kind of more like a sage, what have you. But the one who's more like a sage, right, like an old scribe or something, is more like whites and Jews. So, a scientific racist would try to make it seem like it's the other way around. Okay, for example, if somebody was doing calligraphy, right, this certain type of writing, while they're sitting down and someone came up and kicked the chair underneath them and they're still sitting there and they're not moving. They tried to start fighting with them. And that person's still doing calligraphy while defending himself with one hand. You say that guy's brain is superior to a guy who's just like, yes, yes, yes. I think I see what you mean. Okay, kind of out of touch, right? Because intelligence has to do with everything to do with brain function and genes. Okay. But they would try to make it seem like the guy was like, yes, young man, let me see here. They try to make it seem like he's superior. You see what I'm saying? And we see that with Einstein, with Tesla. These aren't the smartest guys that ever lived. They were pretty clever scientists or some skilled scientists, skilled labor. But they didn't have the best brains and the best genes. Okay? And neither did, Francis Galton or some kind of English guy in an academy. Yes, right away, sir. Okay, that's not the same as a kind of powerful and potent martial art brain. In its Royal African Falcon form is the ideal. So instead of just telling the truth about that and coming to terms with it like a normal and decent human being, they lie about these things. And you can imagine, right? They'd say some racist jokes or something, and to try to avoid the argument and to just try to belittle. And they throw their weight around. They stare at people. Wouldn't you say, Patsworth? And stuff like that, right? So I'm sure you all know that I'm right. Okay. All right. Where are we here? Point number 9: Greek societies were historically, Greek societies were obviously historically white supremacist organizations, right? So we know the Greek frats in college, right? They upheld white supremacy. They were there not only to keep minorities from shining, right? Because at the times the minorities couldn't go to their college at all, but to keep the poor white people in line. So they're upholding kind of scientific racism and white supremacy at the same time. Okay. Point number 10. You see, if you look up Jewish materialism, you'll see a lot of my arguments are proven. So there's certain types of whites, Jews, and LGBT people, right? If we look at the richest families in the world, we look at who's considered a royal, we look at their arguments, who they say they're related to. You're going to see, kind of Viking arguments, German arguments, English arguments, Anglo-Saxon arguments, what have you. Okay? Normans, what have you. All right. Of course, it's the Ashkenazi Jews specifically who are said to be the majority and the most powerful Jews and what have you. Okay, so where we're here, and they're German Jews. And for whatever reason, it ends with the word Nazi, right? Ashkenazi. And I have various arguments as to why that is, but for the sake of not breaking the rules on YouTube, I'm not going to get into that. Okay, so again, the word mate is also in the word materialism. What are the odds that the word Nazi is an Ashkenazi? Right, and Zionists have been called Zion Nazis, whether they are or not. I'm not trying to break the rules. There's new legislation coming out, what have you. And again, I'm gonna put God first, obviously. Okay, if I have to break the rules, I will. But the mate and materialism, right? And Nazi and Ashkenazi. Okay. And it goes mention, men, shun, and pirate is rape, it's scrambled, prepare is pre-rape, compare is mock rape, right? So they're mocking the guy who's actually trying to correct instead of addressing his arguments and so on and so forth. All right. And of course, food, faux do, and meal, melee. And there's a lot of stuff like this. Grub and G-rub. And there's lots of stuff. You really go through the words like this, you'll see that it's a pattern of wordplay. And if we look at the linguistics, we look at the etymology and the Latin roots, and we add that to the formula for deciphering this pattern, which is what a scientist would do, what a wise detective would do, we see that there's a pattern there, right? It doesn't take the person who cracked the Enigma machine, right, the Enigma code or whatever, to figure out that that wordplay is there deliberately and is part of a pattern that we see in politics and history of rape and murder and subjugation and what have you. Okay, so point number 11. Rich people from old money, European lines, are feigning genetic supremacy, okay, after generations of sabotaging the masses. So if somebody's putting stuff into the air and the food and the drink, and they're keeping you from the healthy food, and they're putting McDonald's everywhere, and they're sabotaging you at every turn, okay, and they're making sure they get the most healthy and attractive mates, does that prove their genes superior? No. It actually proves their genes inferior, because people who are superior don't need to cheat. Pretty straightforward. So it's this definitive that they're not superior. It's definitively proven. Point number 12. We see a lot of LGBT sex cult activities everywhere. Okay, and of course, you know, during the slavery, there was buck breaking, right, where they would break the males by raping them, you know, the way gays rape people and so on and so forth. Point number 13. We see the Horus versus Thoth. I went over that earlier, where someone who's more like Horus, which is this intense solar deity, right, the son of God, is like the sun, okay? And again, deity, I use this word kind of loosely because it's Horus in his true form is simply the idea of the son of God. It's not some kind of deity someone made up to try to feel important, right? And Thoth is associated with the moon. So the person is more like an old man whose brain function is dull. He's less sharp. His brain function is less potent, right? You're better off in a young man's body than an old man's body, for example. It's less ripe and sharp and alive, right? It's more like the night. It's more like the dead, the darkness, you know. Okay, the person with the sharp brain function was said to be Pharaoh, right? Horus was the archetype of Pharaoh and not Thoth or thought, because, you know, the night is not greater than the day, the moon is not greater than the sun, and so on and so forth, right? And it has to do with the patterns of nature, it has to do with the specifics and the characteristics, and what type of person is the ideal leader, the sharp and brave, wise, righteous and just and insightful, sense-filled son of God, who God set apart, and not, you know, just some old guy trying to cheat him. That's why it's called the ancient serpent, the devil, and Jesus is said to die at 33, and you can kind of put the rest from there, together from there, right? You see in, matter of fact, let's just end by saying this. You see in Psalm, I believe, Psalm 119, yes, Psalm 119, it says, I understand more than my elders, for I obey your precepts. So I understand more than the old people, for I obey your precepts. Again, I'm not insulting old people or anything. These are just the facts, and I'm being fumed, so I'm just going to end it here.